Welcome back to Spring CS170. We're in the middle of Chapter 4, Introduction to HTML. A couple of things I want to hit on. So one of them, just to maybe clarify things a little bit, sometimes I kind of refer to the element and the tag almost like the same thing, but they're not really the same thing. So you look at element as kind of like the overall concept, and you look at the tags as like the beginning and ending of that concept. So if you have the head, go to here, the head, it's like the head element, but then the tag would be this head tag and tag, right? So that's the difference. But a lot of times you kind of hear about the head element or whatever, and people think about it as as the tags, but they're kind of actually, it's kind of subtle, I guess, but it's two different things here, okay? So when I talk about a tag, it's something like this, here and here. If I talk about the element, it's the overall area, the head, like so, okay? The other thing is, while I'm on this page, you see stuff like this, right? This is what you're required to have. But then if you go over to the HTML editor that I was talking about, you can see that it went straight into essentially like the HTML part, right? It didn't have like the head stuff like the doc HTML and then the HTML like that. So that's one thing to be careful of, right? So when you do create your own HTML file, it's this, right? So this is actually not a complete HTML page, right? But it's really enough to go from here to here. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, when I go over to here later, I'm going to create like just an empty skeleton HTML file. I'm going to put it in here under February 1 week, and you can just use that to, you will rename it whatever, right? And just save it local to your file system, and then just start putting in your HTML when you do your assignment. Okay, so hopefully that makes things easier for you. So once you understand like all these different things, there's no need for you to keep on typing it over and over again. So what I'll do is I'll create like a very simple skeleton HTML file and just put it out here, and you can just use that. Okay, but like I said, be careful when you're here. This is not your HTML page, right? Like I said, you don't see like the stuff for the head or whatnot. This is essentially just having the HTML and showing what it would render over here on the right hand side. Okay, so it's good for a majority of the work that you're going to be doing. It just doesn't include some of the stuff here for a proper HTML page, right? So just keep that in mind if you do choose to use this. If you choose to use one of the other editors, then yeah, depending which editor you're talking about, it could have all of the stuff that you need to save it for an HTML page. Okay, so where am I? So here, so here's the head section. Okay, so you remember I was saying the title, right? So you put the title, it pops up here. You see that? Okay, so like the tab that you have for that page is going to have this as your title. Okay, and then you have your meta and your car set. Like I said, you don't necessarily have to have that, but you might as well put that in there just on the off chance it might cause a problem. And then here's your head. Okay, then you go into the body, and that's where really like whatever you see on the page is going to be here, right? So you can see the main content of the pages goes here, main content of the pages go here. Okay, so that's what the body means. Okay, that's really where you're going to be working most of the time. Okay, and these are just like different examples of different tags, right? And these are pretty easy to look up, so you can look it up on your resources, and I'll pull that up for you. But if you go into a browser here, and let's say HTML, So you'll see something like this, right? This W3 schools, okay, and you see a whole bunch of stuff from W3 schools. So that's a safe and pretty robust source for information with respect to HTML. See if it can come up here. So if you ever want to get like a list of all the possible tags, how to use it, examples and whatnot, this is a good resource. So try to remember this or access it, w3schools.com. Okay. And like I said, you can see all of this here. You can look, here's the example, right? They looked even there's like a try it yourself type of thing. So it kind of brings up its own editor here. And you can see that here, right? And see, look, in this editor, it actually has things like the doc.html and the HTML and then the body, right? So you can see bold and then you can see bold. See, that B and B, and then within it, that becomes bold over here. Okay, so that's just one example. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of these here. So this is a good resource, so something for you to check out, right? But here, what we have is a small sample here. These are probably some of the pretty common ones that you might look at, okay? So you have like this division, you have paragraph. This is kind of like H1 to H6. You kind of saw a little bit of it before when I kind of did the editor before to show like me putting in some text and then making it bold, and goes back to the original HTML. H1 is kind of like the boldest or the biggest or most notable, and then as you go down to H6, it becomes smaller and smaller and less bold. Bold we just did. Italics, you can do the superscript. You see this example here. Underline, you see the underline here. And yeah, this is where you kind of nest tags within each other. Okay, so when it says order matters, it's kind of like this, right? You can't, let's say you see this BIU here. When you close it up, it's kind of sort of like parentheses. You kind of need to match them, right? So here's this U here, this U here. You couldn't put this U over here and put this I over here. So you have to match it up like this. Okay, otherwise it kind of screws things up, right? So this is like the inner one, the second inner one, and then the outer one here. Okay, BIU, UIB. Now remember we said most of these are going to be in pairs. There's a few exceptions, and they're called singleton tags, right? So there's only a couple of them. So this is to make a line, right? That's what this is up here. This is a line break, right? So you continue on the next line. And then meta, which you saw in the head section, right? This is to provide information to the crawlers and give it information about the page, help it with indexing and ranking. And this is what I was saying before, how like the H1 starts off as the biggest one and then it goes down to H6, which is the smallest one, right? Bold, and then it keeps on going down. All right, this is what I mentioned earlier in the lecture about the white space. You put in the white space in the editor itself. It might be good for you to put some space in there just to make it more readable. But when you actually render it on the HTML page, it's not going to matter, right? It's just going to squish everything together in the text area. Okay? You can try that out in your own text editor. Put in some spaces there, and then when you render it on the HTML page, you'll see that it comes all together. The way to create the spaces would be to use like things like the BR to create like a line break. So here's an example, right? So here, this is what you see when you're doing your coding of the HTML. You see the space here, and then you can see that the space is gone when you actually render it. Okay, You see this, like the runner, like long space here. Here's the runner, no space, right? So that's an example there. So this is what they were talking about. We were talking about earlier about HTML editor and a browser. Okay. So with HTML, basically, you change it and you see it right away. That's kind of like the nature of it, right? So, like I said, this is the one that I kind of put out there for people. Um, you can do things like Notepad++, which is fine. The only thing with the Notepad++ is that you kind of create it, you save it as a HTML file, and then you refer to it in a browser. So you're kind of hopping around between windows. So that's one of the things I don't really like by having it. Of course, the upside is once you have some of these editors, usually they have more functionality, more cool things to help you code better. So it's a trade-off, okay? But you can use something like Notepad++, um, or use this here, save it, and then just point to it on your browser, right? So two different things, you'll see it, or kind of like what I have here, right? Have this, and then you see it right away on the right-hand side, okay? Up to you. And this is what I was saying, right? So you have the two windows. You have the editor and the browser, right? So on the left side, this is the editor, and then the browser points to the file that you're saving, the HTML file, and you get that, okay? All right, so there's a couple of little different tools here. One of them is a validation tool, and you have a couple of these, right? So you can check it. So it basically just tells you whether your code is good, right? That's simple as that, right? So you just punch in your code, and it might point out. Sometimes it doesn't catch it, depends on what the issue is, but most of the times it will point out where your issue is. So there's a nice useful tool here, so you might want to check that out. All right, there's just a listing of the tags here. This one says the required tags. Uh, like I think it mentioned earlier in the slide, maybe you don't put it in. It's not the end of the world, but yeah, chances are you need to put it in, right? Like I said, the metadata is used by the crawlers for your indexing and ranking. So why wouldn't you put it in, right? So you need to put it in. But if you really want to be technical about it, probably you don't need to. So hopefully I'm not confusing people, but idea is I think you should put it in, okay? And it's being called as a required tag, okay? HTML, the head, the body, and then the top part to tell you that it's HTML5, right? The title, I kind of think you should put that in, right? Yes, technically it's not a required tag either, right? But again, I think it's good to put this in here. Okay, so put the title in there so you can get that on your tab on top. Here's some more tags. Don't get too hung up on this. We're going to go over this again in terms of doing lists and tables and whatnot. So these are just things to look at right now. For the intro section, you care about this, okay? For chapter 4, continue next week, we're going to get into like these ordered lists. We're going to get into tables and whatnot. But it's just for you to see. And like I said, you can go to that web page here, and you see there's actually a bunch more, okay? Doesn't mean you have to know it. What we're showing you is what you have to know. This is more just to let you know that there's a lot more out there, right? We're only kind of scratching the surface or offering you the fundamental, but if you really want to go with it, there's a lot more to it than that. But it's really beyond the scope of this class, okay? And that, actually that brings up another point. So when we actually do stuff on the exam, again, we try to keep the scope, and all the professors are trying to teach within the same scope. So like these type of things, right? So even though there's potentially these other types of tags that you could potentially use, don't do it for the exam. Okay, the exam should be covered and should be addressed by whatever we've taught you in class. We talked about things that will do code scans, right, to see whether you're cheating or not. One of the things that it will pick up on is if you put stuff into your code that we haven't taught in class, that's going to raise a flag. So be careful on that. Um, I point some of this out for you. This is more for your own extra interest, but when you come to the exam, stick to this. Stick to this stuff because you want to get yourself in trouble when someone scans it and looks at it and say, hey, why are you doing this? We never taught that in class. That's beyond the scope of the class. That's usually a giveaway that someone's been looking at other pages to do the answers for the exam. So I suggest for you not to do that when it comes to the exam. Uh, this is just essentially like the skeleton, like I said. Like I said, I'm gonna actually paste this into a sample HTML file and put that as a resource so you can use that as your skeleton. Just another example, right? You can put this in, try it out yourself, play around with different things like this, okay? Okay. Uh, so you have certain things have like attributes. So the example they give here is like, let's say for meta, uh, you can have this thing where you can set the attribute, this car set, character set, is to UTF-8, okay? And it's what they call name value pairs, right? So here's the name, here's the value. So there's pairs of these. Um, you'll see this in other areas as we start to go through more code, okay? All right, let's see here. How much time do we have? Okay, let me break this out into a different lecture. It's a separate topic relative to like path for your URLs, absolute and relative path, and I'll cut a separate video for that.